Hello. This is Warren from Honed by Jones Sharpening Service in Carson City, Nevada. Let me try that again just to make sure the live stream is working. This is Warren from Honed by Jones Sharpening Service here in Carson City, Nevada. I'm going to be sharpening a little bit more on the Tormek today. I've got 3 more knives to do before I finish up. Let me grab 2 of those that are over here to the side. I put them in the wrong location. This is a I said I was doing Wusthofs, so let's start with the Wusthofs. Wusthof, classic, chef's knife. That's one thing I'm going to sharpen on the Tormek in just a minute here. A little Wusthof paring knife, classic. We're going to sharpen that as well on the Tormek. And then they also, or the customer, his name was Max. He also dropped off I don't know this brand, and that lighting is not working. There we go. I've never seen this brand before, never heard of this brand before, but he also dropped off this knife, this Japanese knife, so we'll get that. It says it's it looks like Yoko 67 layers Damascus steel knife, so we're going to work on that one as well. Hey, Home Spark, what's happening? Every time I see you on here, it makes me want to call you Home Slice. I think that was something I used to say to friends when I was younger. So a couple things about the Tormek, a couple pieces of advice that I've thought of over. So I've been using the Tormek a lot more ever since I got the original grindstone on here over the last few weeks. Couple pieces of advice. Group your knives by depth of blade. So you can see these 2 knives, the Japanese knife and the Wusthof. The depth of the blade is pretty similar, right? Between those two. So by the depth of the blade, in case you're not sure what I'm talking about, I am talking about, see if I can do this. I'm talking about that distance, maybe in the middle of the knife. Get the lighting right there. So that's not showing up, but you get my point, right? So that's the depth I'm talking about. That Japanese knife and that Wusthof classic knife have a similar depth to them. If when you start to sharpen on your Tormek and you're a sharpener and you have multiple knives that you are sharpening, you will have to adjust the bar less up and down in the Tormek if you group knives by depth. So if someone brings you a knife block and that knife block has I don't know, 8-10 knives in it or something like that, you group the ones that are similar depth like this into one group. If you've got a middle amount of depth, group those into another group, and then take the little ones and put those in yet another group. And then as you're sharpening, once you start out with the ones that have the most depth, you can lower your bar down little by little. But the cool thing is when you've got knives that are very similar in depth, the adjustment you have to make from knife to knife is very, very little. So that is helpful. Glad you kicked the drug habit. Well, luckily for me, I have never had a drug habit. When I was young, I even tried to get into a few drugs, but nothing ever worked for me. I tried to smoke pot, that didn't work for me. I tried a few of the other drugs, none of them worked for me. I don't like mushrooms. I don't like what else? I don't know anything. Yeah, I do like to have a cocktail now and then. And I watched Mike from Sharpen Right Services. If you want to see another sharpener who does some really nice, hey, what's happening from Russia? So if you want to see another sharpener who does really cool live streams, check out Mike from Sharpen Right Services. And funnily enough, he was drinking a Monte Carlo, which is a cocktail, while he was sharpening last night on thanks for the clarification, the rebound sessions. I knew that, but thank you for the clarification. Um, Mike from Sharpen Right Services was drinking a Monte Carlo while he was sharpening last night. So that was pretty funny, or maybe it was the night before. I forget. But let's get into these knives. We've got a Wusthof Classic. We've got this knife, which like I said, I don't know how to pronounce this brand. I've never actually seen this brand before. So yeah, one of the things, if you do a lot, I had 2 points about the Tormek. So one of them, I started out on the live stream talking about the depth of the knife and grouping them by the depth of the knife. And then the other thing is the Tormek is really great if you are doing live sharpening somewhere. So I was sharpening at a crafts fair slash arts fair last weekend. It was indoors. And so there's no way I could have brought my belt sanders and sharpened indoors because of the dust and the noise and all of that stuff with the other vendors that were all in the similar area to where I was. There's another cool thing when you're sharpening in public and indoors with the Tormek is that you don't have to put on any, since I used the water trough and I sharpen with the using the water on the Tormek wheel. I'm not creating any dust. I don't need to wear a mask. I don't need to wear any PPE. So I can I can talk to customers while I'm sharpening. One of the interesting things is when I'm using my belt sanders at the farmer's market, I have to stop every time a customer comes up and has a question for me. I have to stop what I'm doing and turn the machine off, take my mask or my respirator, I should say, and pull it down, and then I can start a conversation with them. While I was sharpening with the Tormek at this crafts fair and this arts fair just last weekend, I could keep the machine running. It's quiet enough that I could keep the machine running and I could have a conversation with him. And excuse me, I could have a conversation with him and didn't have to stop what I was doing. Still, even with that, the Tormek is slower than sharpening on the belt sanders, but that's just a couple of points about the Tormek that I don't think get mentioned very often when people talk about its pluses and minuses. All right, let's set this guy up. I'm going to sharpen the Wusthofs Classic we're going to go for 18 degrees today. And then on the Japanese knife, we will do 15. And then we will go on the other Wusthofs, we'll probably do 18 degrees as well. All right. Let's see. Let's get this guy in the clamp here. Sharpening on the Wusthofs is a sharpening on the Wusthofs. Sharpening on the Tormek is a process, and you know, there's an order of operations that you need to use. And sometimes before I start sharpening with the Tormek, I just have to stop and take a breath and make sure that I'm doing everything in the right order. Because you've got to clamp up the knife, you've got to measure with the angle finder to get the right angle. So it's just making sure that you're not skipping any steps. All right, so that is too high for what I want. Getting close. Should be just a few more turns. So I'm just going to repeat those two tips that I was giving about sharpening with, or those 2 points that I was making about sharpening with the Tormek. And the first one was group knives together by depth of the knife. So that way you have to make you have to make the least amount of bar adjustment every time you go from one knife to the next knife. And the second thing is, if you're sharpening in public, the Tormek is great, particularly for inside locations, because you can keep going, you can keep talking to the customer. It's such a quiet machine. And honestly, not only is it a quiet machine, people just like watching when I'm sharpening on this. When I was sharpening at the crafts fair and the arts fair, I would often be, you know, partway into a knife like this, and I would kind of glance up real quick, and there would just be someone standing there who hadn't even said a word to me yet, and they were just watching me sharpen on the Tormek. And then, you know, as soon as I took a break, they'd come up and they'd say, hi, you know, where are you located? How much do you charge? That kind of stuff. But it was, yeah, it's definitely something that people find very entertaining. I think my buddy Sam at Sam's Mobile Sharpening, he refers to it as the waterfall effect. And I think there's something to that. With any machine, whether it's the Tormek or a belt sander, I think having your sleeves out of the way is a really good idea. You don't want them to get caught. When I first got the Tormek, you know how sometimes when you're in the kitchen, you'll have a towel thrown over your shoulder? When I first got the Tormek, I had a towel thrown over my shoulder as I was sharpening with it. It fell, it landed right here and went down into the wheel. And fortunately, before it was able to do any damage, before it got caught up and jammed, I was able to hit the stop button and turn it off. But yeah, any machine that you're working on, gloves that are loose, sleeves that are loose, not a good idea, because that fabric could get caught in that machine, and that could end up injuring you or causing damage to the machine. Obviously, injuring you is a worse outcome than damage to just the machine, but either one of them are not a great thing to have happen. I also think that because the Tormek, so if you're a sharpener watching this, because a lot of times people ask me, is the Tormek worth it? Because it's a slower sharpener. And in our business, speed is paramount, right? We're trying to get through as many knives as efficiently and as effectively as possible in a quality way when we're sharpening. One of the things, though, I think that isn't talked about with regards to speed is not only can you keep talking to customers when you're working with the Tormek, you can just sharpen in places you'd never be able to sharpen in with a belt sander with the Tormek. So if you want to promote your business, you could go to, I'm just spitballing here. You could go to a local butcher shop and set up and do demo sharpening outside of a local butcher shop. You could think of all, I could think of all a hardware store setting up inside or outside if they would let you, and do demo sharpening and just give away business cards. I imagine with the Tormek, you could do that kind of thing. Whereas with my belt sanders, I could set up outside underneath an easy up for sure, but there's no way I would be able to set up inside. And I guess I think about the inside versus outside because I live in northern Nevada, and the weather here gets super cold in the winter. And so there's 3 months out of the year where I'm just not likely to do anything outside, except for the one farmer's market that I do weekly. Other than that, I'm not going to go set up somewhere and do demo sharpening or have a regular weekly pop-up sharpening spot. I envy Steven Sharpens. If you follow him on YouTube, he sharpens primarily at different locations around LA. I just imagine all year round he's comfortable when he's sharpening outside. Whereas me living in northern Nevada, not so much the case. I just had to remind myself there to go slow. I'm so used to sharpening on my belt sander, and on my belt sander, the movement is so much faster. And I have to remind myself every time I get on the Tormek, which is more and more lately, I have to remind myself, oh yeah, that's getting very sharp already. I have to remind myself to slow down. The belt sanders, you don't want to hang out. You don't want to lull in any particular area because you can take off too much material, or you could overheat the edge if you hang out too long. With the Tormek, especially with the original grindstone, you can take your time, go nice and slow, and it's actually preferred. So we're just going to do a couple more strokes on this knife, and this knife is done. I'm going to do a back and forth on this side, just to kind of get one last pass on there. And then I'm just going to do one more pass on each side, and this knife is good to go. And then we're going to move on to the Japanese knife. And then we'll go back to the Wusthofs paring knife to finish up with. Actually, I'm going to do 2 more passes. I said I was going to do 1 more. I used a little more pressure. So that's one of the things on the Tormek. You can vary the pressure, right? How much weight you're pushing down on the stone with. So I'm going to do 2 passes to finish off here, 1 in each direction. And I'm not going to use any weight at all. Just the lightest pass possible. Once again, my name is Warren, and my business, which is located in Carson City, it's called Honed by Jones, and I'm on all the things at Honed by Jones. So I'm on YouTube, at Honed by Jones, Instagram, at Honed by Jones, TikTok, at Honed by Jones, Facebook, at Honed by Jones, all over the place. That one's done. Well, it's not done, but it's done with that part of the process. Let me grab a towel from over here on the other side of my shop just to dry it off real quick. And I'll show you the next step of the process once I get done with the Japanese knife. Yeah, so I'm in all the places as Honed by Jones. Please feel free to leave a comment. Hey, Warren, can you aim the camera down just a smidge? Yes, I can. I did notice that I had a little space up top there that I could work with. So yeah, I'll angle it down just a smidge. Thanks for asking. Let me turn the machine off so I don't lean into that spinning wheel. How about something like that? Is that going to work better for you, Home Spark? Let me know. Oh, I'm going to change the angle. So I sharpened the Wusthofs at 18. We're going to sharpen the Japanese knife at 15 degrees. Why, might you ask, am I doing that? Because of how these knives come from the factory. People always ask me what angle is best for sharpening a knife, and it really depends on what you're doing with the knife. For example, the sushi chefs. So I sharpened for some sushi chefs just down the street from me. There's a restaurant 6 blocks that way. Okay, awesome. The camera angle works better. Good. So just 6 blocks down the street from me, there's a sushi restaurant. And I'm sorry, I didn't sharpen for the chefs. I sharpened for the owner of the sushi restaurant recently. And he and I were talking about the sushi chefs who all sharpen their own knives at his restaurant. And I said, what angle do your sushi chefs, I have a hard time saying that word, sushi chefs, what angle do they sharpen at? And he said they sharpen at 8 to 10 degrees per side. Let me repeat that, 8 to 10 degrees per side. And I, after my mouth closed up from being stuck open, after he said 8 to 10 degrees per side, I said, why? And he said, because the hardest thing they have to cut with their knives all day is the saran wrap that they wrap sushi in. Their knives have to be crazy sharp to cut that saran wrap all day long. And so that's why they sharpen them at such an acute angle. So yeah, it's the sharpest I've ever heard of anyone sharpening their knives is those sushi chefs at that restaurant sharpening at 8 to 10 degrees per side. And the reasoning totally made sense. He's like, it's not just about cutting the food. It's not just about cutting the rolls. It's not just about cutting the fish or whatever else they're cutting. He said it's that saran wrap that they have to cut through all day. Now, I used to work at a garden nursery, a plant nursery, about 30 hours a week before I started sharpening full time. And sometimes I drove the forklift, and sometimes I unloaded pallets from the forklift. And sometimes after I unloaded those pallets from the forklift, I had to take the plastic wrap that's holding all the stuff together on the pallet. I'm sure you've seen this before. If you've been in any big box store, you've seen a pallet wrapped in like saran wrap style plastic. That stuff does not cut very easily. So if you can imagine, if you're a sushi chef cutting plastic wrap, saran wrap, whatever you want to call it, all day long while you're rolling up sushi rolls, you need a very, very sharp knife. So yeah, that was an interesting learning experience. So now I know if I ever sharpen again for a sushi restaurant. Right now I sharpen for 2 or 3 restaurants in Carson City. Is that right? Yeah. 2 going on 3. I'm just about to start sharpening for another one. Um, they're mostly Americana food restaurants. They're using standard, most of the chefs are not using Japanese chef's knives. I take that back. I sharpened for 3 restaurants and it's going to be 4. So most of them are using German style chef's knives, not Japanese knives. And so I don't sharpen their knives to quite the same acute angle that I would sharpen a sushi knife to. And we're getting close with this Japanese knife, this 67 layer Damascus knife. If you're enjoying the content, I should say this, I almost forgot. If you're enjoying the content on the Honed by Jones YouTube channel, feel free to like, subscribe, leave a comment, tell a friend, etc., etc., etc. I talked about this in a previous Tormek video. When I'm moving the knife back and forth, the main spot that I'm focusing on is actually the palm of my hand that is on the clamp. So you see I have one hand on the handle of the knife and one hand on the clamp of the knife here. Thumbs going back here, fingers resting over the top, and I'm actually just focusing on moving my palm back and forth across this bar. And that's how I don't have the steadiest hands in the world. My hands shake a little bit just because of a life of being a percussionist and all the other hand work I've done by hand over the course of my life. So my hands are not this most steady hands in the world. So I had to figure out a way when sharpening on the Tormek to keep myself as steady as possible and really focusing in on that location and the palm of my hands and just kind of slowly pulling the knife across the stone while balancing it out with the opposite hand has worked really well. So one of the things I've been demonstrating on the Tormek lately is it gets the knife pretty sharp if you just use the stone and you don't do anything else. So this is not my finished product here, but let's take a sample of sharpening on the Tormek. And I have no idea how this is going to cut because I'm not done with my full process yet. But let's see. I almost did that off camera. Yeah, so that's pretty good for coming straight off the stone. Now I still have a stropping step that I do to finish off the knives. But as you can see, that's nice and sharp. So that's going to work great for that customer. He said he doesn't actually use that Japanese knife that much. He actually uses the Wusthofs mostly, but he wanted the Japanese knife sharpened anyways. He said this knife was a gift from his, he and his wife bought a house about 3 or 4 years ago. And this knife was a gift from, like a closing gift from their realtor. Whereas this Wusthofs Classic, they prefer that and they use that more often. All right, let's go into the last one, the final chapter, which is the paring knife. So you saw when I went from the Wusthofs Classic to the Japanese knife, you saw that I barely had to move the crossbar here in terms of height because I paired the knives by depth. And so there wasn't much movement needed to get to the next knife. That's really helpful if you're doing a bunch of knives. It doesn't matter as much when you're only doing 2 or 3 knives, but if you are sharpening 10 knives out of a knife block, it's really helpful if you pair them by depth. All right. I said this on my last, what are you doing, Warren? I said this on my last live stream, but I forgot to say that on this one, or say it on this one. Where are people watching from? I'm in Carson City, Nevada. So we are kind of, if you make a triangle with Reno and Tahoe, so Reno, Nevada and Lake Tahoe, we are kind of the third point of the triangle there. We're the capital of Nevada. Probably a lot of people might think that was Las Vegas, Nevada, which is at the complete opposite end of the state. I'm from California originally, and the way I describe it is I call Carson City Aurora, Illinois. I'm originally from the Quad Cities. So I spent the first 12 years of my life in Moline, Illinois. If you know where that is, the easiest way to describe it is right where Interstate 80 crosses the Mississippi. That's where I spent the first 12 years of my life. I'm a Midwestern boy at heart. And then we moved to California. Actually, I'm going to do something totally different. I'm going to freehand sharpen this guy. I don't typically do that on the Tormek, but I'm going to show you guys just because I don't typically do it. I'm going to show it. The reason I'm going to do it is sometimes on really small knives, I prefer to not have the clamp and all of that business in the way. And I kind of have reference points now on the machine so that I know where I want to hold it and what angle I want to hold it at, to get the proper angle. So I'm actually going to freehand sharpen this. But yeah, I was born in Illinois, spent the first 12 years there. We moved to California when I was 12, just about to turn 12. I remember when we flew out to California and the airplane leaned over. You know how when they make the final approach, they turn like 90 degrees sideways and you're looking straight down out of the window? And I turned to my mom and I said, "Why did we fly back to Illinois?" Because in 1978 or whatever it was, when we moved to California, the Sacramento airport was out in the middle of nowhere in a bunch of agricultural fields, and it looked from the plane, it looked exactly like the agricultural fields where the airport was located in Illinois, where we left. And so I thought we had turned around and flown back to Illinois. All right, freehand sharpening on the Tormek, the final knife. I don't do this often, but I do it sometimes with small knives. So let's just go ahead and do this. And it's about muscle memory. If you're ever going to freehand sharpen on anything, whether that's a belt sander or the Tormek or a whetstone, it's about establishing muscle memory so that you know that you are doing a similar movement over and over and over again in a similar location. I think for my mind, freehand sharpening has always seemed pretty normal because I've been a percussionist for so long, and I'm so used to moving around my instruments without having to look at them. So if I've got two congas and bongos and something else set up, I sometimes need to be looking at the band leader, and yet I need to be able to play at the same time. And so I'm used to establishing muscle memory of where things are in space, and being able to work with that even without having to look at it. Of course, when I'm sharpening, I look at what I'm doing, but that's why I think that freehand sharpening, some people don't like to do it. It doesn't come natural to them. I feel pretty comfortable when I do it. Do I think it creates a precise, as precise of an edge as using the clamp in the guide? No, not at all. I don't think it creates as accurate nor as precise as of an edge as using the clamp and the guide bar would do, crossbar, whatever you call it. But am I satisfied with my work when I'm freehand sharpening? Sure. It might also be because I started out on whetstones, and so this feels pretty familiar to me from whetstone sharpening. I don't do much whetstone sharpening anymore, except for because I just don't have the time. Pretty much my own kitchen knives are now are just about the only knives that I ever sharpen on whetstones. Occasionally, a customer will ask me for whetstone sharpening, and I always like it when I get the chance to do it. But I charge extra for whetstone sharpening. That guy feels great. When I check for sharpness, I use I learned the method from watching Murray Carter's videos on YouTube. Murray Carter talks about the 3-fingered test of sharpness. And so that's the method that I use to test to see if a knife feels sharp. Obviously, I do all the other kind of testing stuff, like cutting through stuff, cutting through paper or whatever, telephone paper, telephone book paper, cutting through various other kinds of magazine paper, all kinds of different stuff. But yeah, that guy feels great. So, let's see. Driven through the Quad Cities many times to visit nephew in Des Moines. Yeah, so when I would meet people as I got older and they said they had moved from the East Coast to the West Coast or from the West Coast to the East Coast, I would often ask them if they took Interstate 80. And if they remember when they drove across the Mississippi River, and they would usually say, yes, I remember driving across the Mississippi River. And I would say, that's my hometown right there where Interstate 80 crosses the Mississippi River. So yeah, so I totally get it that you've driven through that area. I said this knife was done. I want to put just a little bit more work towards the heel of the knife here. sometimes my buddy Vinny was doing, he's a sharpener nearby, and he also has a channel. He's the knife guy, Reno. He and I are super close friends, and we are competitors. We live about 40 minutes from each other, maybe 35 minutes from each other. We are direct business competitors, but we don't care. We are still friends, and we still help each other out. We still call and text and audio message each other just about every day with some kind of question about sharpening. Hey, I'm sharpening this tool. I've never done it before. Can you give me some advice on how to sharpen it? Anyway, he talked in his live stream earlier today about how the mistake you can make as a sharpener isn't making mistakes. The mistake you can make as a sharpener is not fixing your mistakes, not taking the time to go back to double check something to make sure it's accurately sharp. He said, that's the worst thing you can do. Of course, as a human being, you're going to make mistakes while you're sharpening, but if you don't go back and take the time to fix them and make them right for the customer, that's where you're going to have problems. So I'm glad I took a little bit extra time on that Wusthof there. So this is Warren from Honed by Jones. Thanks for tuning in to my live stream on a Thursday afternoon. Please like, please subscribe. Thanks for the folks who left comments in the description. So I'm gonna stop this live stream now, but when I add the description in after it uploads to YouTube, I will put in the description the links. Oh, I said I was going to show my stropping. You know, I can't from this camera angle. I apologize. I said I was going to show you guys on the live stream how I strop on the honing on the leather wheel here, but I can't from this angle, and I don't feel like moving my camera all around. So just trust that that's the last step of the process. I'll show that one another time. Hey, you're welcome, HomeSpark. Thanks for tuning in. Anyways, please like, please subscribe, please tell a friend about my channel. Comment, look in the description when I'm done uploading this video, and I'll have links to each of the machines that I use in sharpening, the Tormek, the Kalamazoo Industries, 1x42s, the Buck Tool 1x30, the Edge Pro, you can't see them, they're over there, the Edge Pro Bevel Tech and the Edge Pro Apex. I'm going to start adding a twice as sharp professional model into those links because I just, Tuesday, I have a twice as sharp professional model coming. So I'll add that in there as well. Grateful for your time, grateful for your energy, and I will catch you all on the flip side.